Let me tell you a little bit about doubt. Doubt is plaguing us in a huge way in our faith. We see so many people that are doubting their faith time and again. I want to start with a story, and so that we can all relate to what doubt's all about. Imagine it's a Tuesday night, okay? It's a cold night, and you're out at a bonfire with all your family and friends. But this isn't just any normal Tuesday night. This is a special night. This night is about something that you've been looking forward to for months, and you're around the bonfire, and you are singing songs with everyone. You're actually singing great hymns of the faith. You're a Christian. This happens to be 1844 in the month of October, and you happen to be in the upper part of New York State. And you are expecting that night on October 22nd, 1844, for the second advent of Jesus Christ. You've been following the teachings of William Miller. And if any of you have ever studied the Great Second Awakening, you'll know the story of the Millerites, who actually, on that day, October 22nd, 1844, they sat around waiting for Jesus Christ to come back. It's an amazing story. The whole United States was abuzz about what William Morris was talking about. Some people were William Miller was talking about. Some people were praising him for what he was doing and saying. Other people were ridiculing him. But he had predicted by using the book of Daniel and the prophecies and the visions of the book of Daniel exactly that he knew that Jesus was going to come back on October 22nd. Thousands and thousands of people were following him at that time. And they were waiting patiently. And these were good people. They had gone to their churches and heard William Miller preach and tell his story about how he came to this conclusion. And he was very compelling. And it was exciting to experience. This is when Jesus Christ is coming back to earth. And you sit around that night with your friends and you're in celebration, because that night is going to be the fulfillment of your faith. Your faith is going to be made sight. And as you're singing and talking and sharing stories, all of a sudden in the east you start seeing a faint glow in the eastern sky. And it keeps growing larger and larger. And it's not Christ coming on his throne, but it's just the sun rising on a Wednesday. A lot of historians call that day the Great Disappointment, because so many people who were so excited about Jesus coming back had sold their family farms. They had given all their money to the poor. They believed that Jesus was going to come that day. And then when Wednesday came, they sat there bewildered. Some people were angry. Some people said, well, we must have miscalculated, because this was actually the second recalculation by William Miller. He actually thought Jesus was going to come in 1842 at first, then 1843, and then he actually changed it to 1844. A lot of people were disappointed that day. They had believed very earnestly in something that was not true. Jesus did not come. The great advent of Christ was not there. And some people just left the faith altogether at that point. Doubt is what I want to talk about. Imagine being a part of that. And a lot of people wondering, what am I believing? What do I believe to be true? And basically your whole worldview is really kind of bottled up in your idea of what you think is actually reality. And your belief system is actually the lens you look at reality. And it can be actually very accurate, or it can be skewed. Imagine the young teenage boy who straps on bombs around his chest as a jihadist, thinking he is going to actually enter with great glory into the afterworld and bring a lot of honor to his family here on earth if he goes and actually creates this moment where he can destroy many infidel with a suicide bombing action. That's based upon his belief. The people who thought eugenics back in the World War I and World War II was the best way to purify the human race believed this to be true. It was a belief. And so as we look into doubt itself, is when people are actually wrestling with what is actually true. And I used to think doubt was anti-faith and anti-belief. And I'm coming to the conclusion that it's really more than that. Yes, it can be that, but much more it's that we're trying to make inside of ourselves our belief structure to be grounded in reality. And so we doubt. We ask the hard questions of things. Is this true, what I believe? And what we're finding out is a lot of people in our culture today are asking that very fundamental question about the faith that we hold in our hearts. I did. And I did it for almost 20 years. Doubted. Am I believing what's really accurate? What's reality? Is it true? Or is this some kind of nice fantasy that just makes me feel good about my condition? And a lot of people in that situation. As a matter of fact, in the church today, if you look at just the millennial generation, in many churches today, you'll find out that there are 1 out of every 4 that are in serious doubt about their faith. So imagine going to church and looking at people from the ages of 15 to 25, 30, and look at them cluster and gather together and have conversations and think, out of that cluster, 1 out of every 4 of them are seriously doubting their faith. And that's really what we're seeing. And that's just in the church itself, not the people who just have given up on church altogether. And those people who are, and it's not just a millennial problem, we see it in Generation X people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and we also see it in people who are in the baby boom generation. We see a lot of doubt. What do we believe and how do we know it's to be true? And they don't believe that the church is a place to go to get answers, that the discussion is no longer welcome in the church, that if anybody does come with doubt, that's something that should be pushed outside our doors. And that's the way I had felt when I started doubting. It just wasn't the appropriate conversation to have inside the church. And this is exactly how a lot of people who are in doubt feel about the church itself. They are asking really this question: what is real, what is authentic, and what is true? They want to know those answers. And they're asking the biggest question of all: why do we believe what we believe, and how do we know it's true? I remember taking a trip with my mom we went to Israel back in the mid-2000s for a family wedding. And one afternoon, we actually were invited to spend some time with the man who owned the hotel that we were staying in. We were there for a week. And Whigham, who owned the hotel, invited us for dinner, afternoon, a 3 p.m. dinner at his house. And we were just excited because that was a very gracious offer on his part. So we went to his house on that Friday. And Whigham is actually a Sunni Muslim. If you know about the Muslim faith, Friday is their like a Christian Sabbath, and so that was their holy day. And for him to actually invite us into his house was a great honor. And not only that, his wife was an amazing cook. I had never seen a plate of rice as big as they served. It was amazing. And they served us stuffed grape leaves, all kinds of stews and vegetables, and the most important thing they served was sheep's neck. I had never had that before, but it was the most amazing cut of meat I've ever had in my life. After we were sitting there, and it was totally miserable with all the food we had just eaten, Whigham and I were just talking, and I asked Whigham this question because he was telling me about going to pray at the mosque, right before the meal. And I was just asking him a little bit about his faith. And I finally asked him the question. I said, how did you become Sunni Muslim? And Whigham kind of looked a little bit flabbergasted by the question. He never really thought about it. He said, well, I grew up in a Muslim community. He actually grew up in Ramallah in the West Bank. And my parents are Muslim. I went to a Muslim school. I married a Muslim wife. I'm Muslim. I thought that was interesting. Okay, I can see that. When I got on the plane and flew back to the U.S. the very next day, I was sitting in the plane and thinking about what Whigham had told me, and I asked myself this question: why did I become a Christian? Well, grew up in a Christian country. My parents are Christian. Went to a Christian school. Married a Christian wife. I'm Christian. And it dawned on me at that moment, and if you ever had this situation happen to you before, like it happened to me, you just realized, had I just accepted Christianity because it was culturally relevant, or that it was easy, because everybody else was Christian around me. If I had grown up with Whigham as my next door neighbor in Ramallah, would I have been Sunni Muslim? Or if Whigham had grown up as my next door neighbor in the U.S., would he have been Christian? Had we both just accepted the religion that happened to be the lowest hanging fruit on the tree for us? That thought scared me. I realized I had not chosen Christianity because I believed in the veracity of the faith. I had accepted it because everyone around me said it was true, and I had never examined it myself. And it was that point I dived into the deepest part of my doubt. It was after that plane trip to Israel. It's a scary thought, isn't it? When I started talking to a lot of people about doubt, I found out there are 6 triggers that I see happen over and over again when I talk with people who are doubting. One of the first triggers is that when they look at the physical world around us, and over the last 200 years, it's amazing what we've learned in science. The Hubble telescope is one of the greatest inventions I think we've ever had in science. I don't know if you've been following, seeing some of the images from the Hubble telescope. They have opened up a whole new world to us we didn't even know existed. Like this galaxy right here, it's a spiral galaxy, is 110 million light years away. When we first started looking into the sky, we just saw just a little white smudge. We didn't realize that smudge in the Atlia constellation was actually 250 galaxies all combined together. And inside those 250 galaxies, the smallest of the galaxies had 1 million stars in it. The largest had over 100 million. This happens to be one of them. And for us, for many years, for the whole known scientific world that we knew, that was all that we knew, was just as a white smudge in our telescopes. Not until the Hubble telescope showed us something so deep and wonderful as this. We see these physical things and we say, hey, how does it match up with the way that our religious doctrine is? And we're finding a lot of people say, a lot of things we teach in the church don't match up with what we're learning about science. So that causes them to doubt. That becomes a trigger. Another trigger is philosophy itself. In the last 150 years, we have seen a major transformation of philosophical thought. The masters of suspicion, Freud, Nietzsche, Marx, all came in and started teaching us things about how to question things and really developed a whole realm of skepticism that we hold today. Have we asked the hard questions of our faith? Or is it some kind of just nice stories, myths that have just been handed to us from generation to generation? And philosophical inquiry says, how do we know what we know? And that scared me. That became one of the triggers for me. Another one is pluralism itself. In our current environment, we see so many different faiths that are around us today. We see Islam, we see, of course, Christianity, we see Judaism, we see Buddhism, all of these different faiths, and now who is actually the one who has the best read on God? And they all say that they do. Is it the 2.4 billion Christians that are right? Or is it the 1.6 billion Muslims who are right? Who's got the best read on God? And that pluralism has led to a lot of unbuckling of faith and increased doubt. Another trigger is just the present pleasure of the day. A lot of religions today tell us to live for another world, live for something beyond this world, and that this world really is diminished in their worldviews. And they say, well, what is all this about? Why is this being demonized, the things that we really enjoy as humans? And why are we taking this off the table and not enjoying the very life that we know we do have, and for a life we don't know we have? And people have started questioning their faith because of that. And another one is just people itself. Religious people doing very, very bad things. We talk about the jihadists, and it's easy for us to tisk them. I can do that because what they do is absolutely scary. That they're willing to kill innocents just for their faith. But also we see it in Christianity today. We see it in Buddhism. We see it everywhere. People who get into faith, it creates crazy people. So that actually becomes a trigger of doubt for a lot of people. And one of the more significant ones is just having personal pain. When something so horrible happens to you, like a 5-year-old child, she dies of leukemia. Or remember the Christmas tidal wave that hit Indonesia and Thailand. And just think of the atrocities that happen with hurricanes and tornadoes and just the senseless slaughter of people through wars. And the personal pain that we feel can actually unhinge our faith. See, these things actually, when you look into people's lives, you'll see that these things are patterns that you can understand. But there are 2 types of doubt. Once people are doubting, they usually fall into 2 different categories. One of them I've noticed is that there's dishonest doubt. These are people who just don't really want to know what's true. They just don't want to believe what you believe. And you may have met people like that. You may be one of those people. I kind of flirted with that a little bit in my journey of doubt. I just didn't want to believe what everyone else believed. I call that dishonest doubt because it's really not a search for truth. But there are a lot of other people who have honest doubt, and they say, just tell me that this is real, This is authentic. And that's the doubt that's really there in a lot of people's hearts. And if we can actually understand that, I think it could help a lot. When I started to understand this idea of honest doubt, it really helped me a lot to be able to comb through my thinking when I was going through my journey. So what do we do to respond to doubt? I think it was really helpful for a lot of people because it was hard for me to actually find people that would be willing to talk to me about these things. But I think it's really we were beholden to think of our faith as not something that just believe this and turn off your brain and walk away. What we call fideism. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. We see that the definition of faith actually is a lot deeper of a definition, isn't it? It says it's a substance of things hoped for and it's an evidence of things not seen. Faith itself is saying, and even the Bible comes out and says, it has substance and it has evidence. And a lot of times we look at faith and say, it is fighting against substance and evidence. And if you take substance and evidence and interject it into faith, you're watering down the faith. But the Bible itself tells us, no. There is substance to the things hoped for, and there is evidence to the things not seen. There is something substantial to faith that a lot of people who are doubting need to hear. So what do? We do give them real, authentic, and true. We let the people who are doubting, let's deal with those things that they're doing. Let's make discussions welcome in our churches. And when we do, that welcoming will be fantastic. They will run to the church for ideas and figuring out, what do I do with my doubt? Because when it comes down to it, this has been an axiom of the church from the very beginning, that there is a unity of truth. A lot of times we have looked at his revealed scripture and nature as two separate realms. But for God, who created both, for him who is unified in all things, those things have to be unified. They have to be because he's unified. And there's a unity of truth. Matter of fact, the medievals said this. It said that God wrote two great books, the book of nature and the book of scripture. And we know that from the scriptures. Psalm 19 tells us that, doesn't it? The heavens declare his glory, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day and day it utters speech, and night it shows knowledge. There is no truth. There is no voice where there's no language where his voice is not heard. So we know that even the scripture itself tells us there is a unity there. And so that whatever we learn about nature cannot be in conflict with what we learn about revealed scripture. If we see that conflict, it's not because these two realms are incompatible. It's that our understanding of the two realms is incomplete. And I had to learn that lesson in a very hard way. Because I kept those things, I said, I feel like they're competing, they're at war, and they're really not. They actually all point back to the Creator. And we can take that unity of truth and we can take it into the physical world, knowing that anything that we learn and it gets revealed in science is truth. And if it is truth, it is God's truth, because all truth is God's truth, because he is truth, according to the Christian faith. So nothing outside the physical world can really be at war. And there's also truth in philosophy. There's a unity of truth there as well. We can look into the philosophical traditions of man and see that there is unity and truth at that point. And I think we need to be as skilled there as we possibly can to help people who are really struggling that, yes, philosophical inquiry will lead you to truth because it is truth that will ultimately be the bedrock of what we discover. There's also unity of truth in the pursuit of the sacred. I put this in here to remind us that the people who are actually going after other faiths, a lot of times we just look at them as just being disobedient, whatever, because they're not being Christian. But what is attracting them to those faiths are the truths that are probably in the Christian faith as well. They're not being attracted to the lies and the deceits there. They're being attracted to the truth. And that's why we see in Paul and Mars Hill, he draws that out, doesn't he? And he shows in their faith systems, the Romans even had little shreds of truth that he was able to grab and be able to say, this is the unity of truth you need to understand. So it's easy for us to villainize other faiths, but we need to understand that those faiths have a lot of the same exact truth that anchors all truth. And it is a unifying truth. We can even find a unity of truth in pain and suffering. For inside of our pain and suffering, it's telling us grand and great things about what truth really means. and how we need to re-establish and re-understand how God is really relating to man in this world. When Jesus, before he left, he told us these things. He said, first of all, one thing that's going to really help people a lot, and I think when we deal with people in doubt, we need to remember this, that there's a unity of love. Jesus told us, he said, this is how people are going to know that I was actually sent by my Father, by your unity and your love. We know these passages for anybody who's been in the church before. Our love for God and our love for people is the very foundation of all that God has told us to do. And so, that being said, our love for God, if God is a unified God, our love for God and our love for people can never conflict with each other. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? Sometimes we actually say, well, I'm loving God with this action, even though it may be unloving to people. It can never be loving to God when it's unloving to people. And it can never be loving to people and unloving to God. Those have to be married together because there's unity of love even in those two commands. Big idea, but it's something I think that the world needs to see more out of us. I came to the conclusion that Christianity is a rational faith. After I left the faith, came back into it, and not only is it a rational faith, but it actually does best explain and unite all of reality. And everything that we know about what it means to be human, our life, our death, everything that all comes together, and it shows to us exactly what God has intended. And I think the Christian faith does the most amazing job of bringing those things together for us. If you're talking with someone who is doubting, especially to the point of saying, does God exist? One of the most helpful tools that really shocked me and got me thinking was kind of like a switch for me, was actually Pascal's wager. Has anybody ever heard of Pascal's wager before? Yeah, I'll just kind of, for those who haven't heard it, it's a great little exercise to go with people. Pascal, of course, he was a great scientist, if you guys know who he is. He's also a wonderful, wonderful writer of theological ideas. His Pensies is a great compendium of Christian thought, if you have a chance to read those. But he said this, there are two possibilities of reality. First of all, God exists. That's a reality that could possibly be. There's also a reality that God doesn't exist. Some people think that. He says there are two reactions we can have to this. I can believe in God, or I can choose not to believe in God. Well, from that, you can see you can set up a nice 2x2 quadrant-based analysis, which I like to do because I'm in marketing, and that's what I do. So let's look at each one of these possible scenarios. Let's take the left-hand side first, and let's look at the I believe in God section. And at the very top there, it says, if I believe in God and God exists, well, that's a good thing. All's well, okay? I played into reality perfectly. But what happens if I believe in God and God doesn't exist? Well, all's well. I may live in a diluted bubble of unreality, but I'm pretty happy. As a matter of fact, most psychologists say people who are religious are happier than people who are non-religious. So I'm going to be happy there too. So I'm actually going to win out in the end of that day. Pascal goes one farther and says, what if I don't believe in God? What happens? Let's look at the bottom right, and it says right here, God doesn't exist. Well, all's well, because I actually guessed right. God doesn't exist. I don't believe in him. I live my life and just do my thing. All is well. What happens, though, if God does exist and I don't believe in him? Well, all's not well. And that's Pascal's wager. Now, you probably say, well, you give that to people and you try to say that to them, they'll be, whoa, but. And you can do that with Pascal's wager. You can argue around this thing all day long. But the big idea is that when you are actually talking to people who say, I don't believe in God, say, okay, how certain are you that God doesn't exist? If you're 100% certain, you're okay. If you're not 100% certain, you've got some risk there. Now, is that true faith? Is that going to be the saving faith that we talk about in the Christian tradition? I don't know. But we do know this about God. He said this, a bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. If we can just get people just to accept that thought, maybe if I just believe in God for this reason, that God over time will turn it into faith. And that would be a wonderful thing. Conclusion, we need to show some sympathy to those who doubt. We need to understand what's causing their doubt, what type of doubt that they have, and ways that we can engage them so that they feel accepted, and can deal with this thing in a loving environment. And that's where really I think where I learned the most important thing I could probably do with the rest of my life is be that. And I'm really excited about that. And I'm always reminded by this, and this is my hope. St. Augustine said this, you probably have seen this millions of times. I can't ever get tired of it. But thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee. The people are doubting because their hearts are restless. And I think St. Augustine was correct. The reason why that restlessness exists is because they are trying to find that true home for their heart, which we find in God himself. So I want to say thank you.